This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jespersen.
Real Talkers, I'm excited to have you along for this episode. You know, a lot of times we'll talk to experts on Canadian politics, and every once in a while we'll talk to experts on American politics, and then once in a blue moon, we land a big fish, somebody that's an expert in both. And Dr. Kathy Cramer's up from the University of Madison, Wisconsin, and she's going to be joining us in just a second. We're going to be talking about the rural-urban divide in Alberta. We're going to be talking about what's happening down in the United States. We're going to be talking about how the next elections may play out, both stateside and up here in Canada. Plus, we're going to get into matters of the economy and people and real-life stuff that matters when the rubber hits the road in your own personal life. So Dr. Cramer from the University of Wisconsin-Madison coming up in just one quick second. But first, I want to remind you that these shows don't happen without the support of partners like Alberta's top online real estate school. That's Relo, and you'll find them online at relo.ca, RELO.ca. It's the best place you can start your real estate career. You know, a lot of people get excited about a career in real estate. They see other folks are doing it. They're choosing their own hours. They're working when they want. There's unlimited earning potential. Plus, you're helping people all the time. But if you go with the wrong training school, let me tell you, you're going to stumble out of the gates. Remember that message, that email we got from JR a while back? JR said that he went with a competing online real estate school, failed the exam twice, was listening to Real Talk, heard us talking about Relo, registered, and well, guess what happened next time JR wrote the exam? He aced it, and his career is now going gangbusters. You can invest in that same success in yourself. Find out more about the advantages that only Relo has by visiting them online. And don't forget, you can save yourself a couple of $100. The code Ryan100, all one word, will knock $100 off both the residential and commercial real estate bundles. That's Ryan100 when you get started at Relo.ca. Well, it's a real pleasure to welcome to the Real Talk studio Dr. Kathy Cramer. She's the Virginia Superior Professor of Political Science, the Natalie C. Horton Chair of Letters and Science at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She's an expert in matters of the general population, politics, the economy, real life kind of stuff. She's the co-chair of an American Academy and Arts and Science Commission called Reimagining Our Economy. And she's the author of the best-selling book, The Politics of Resentment. She's making her Real Talk debut ahead of a couple of appearances at the University of Alberta. Welcome to Edmonton.
Thank you so much. I'm really honored and just delighted to be on your show.
I have a couple of friends that live in Wisconsin, and I feel like the proximity to Canada is enough. I like to convince myself that they pay a little more attention to what's going on in our country than the average American, and of course that includes you.
Wow, I try, we try, but yeah, I'm sorry, you get way more news about the U.S. than we do about Canada. I know it's true.
Well, I mean, it's like, obviously, you know, I don't need to pump anybody's tires, but the reality of the world is when the world's superpower is headed to the ballot box, people are going to pay attention because there's ripple effect for every single country on planet Earth.
Yeah, I know, I realize. Yeah, I could feel it here.
Yeah.
Just people really concerned. Yep.
Concerned?
Yeah.
Is that the number one vibe you get?
Yeah.
Why do you
Interested
think?
and concerned. I think, as in the U.S., people in Canada feel, and I think rightly so, that the outcome of this election has major implications, right? Both for policy, but also just for the future of democracy, the direction that we take it, and what I know about Canadian politics is a lot of our politics gets replicated here. Some strategies that politicians use in the U.S., folks up here try as well. And so it's both, the outcome of the election, but how people behave during the election. So, people are watching closely, I realize.
It's we had 3 political experts on the show yesterday, all members of the same policy firm, but all with different political backgrounds. So you've got an NDP perspective, a liberal perspective, and a conservative perspective, and we kind of tried to hold their feet to the fire and get predictions on the Canadian election and the outcome of some provincial elections coming up. A couple of them said they wanted to see the outcome in November 1st. They wanted to see what happened in the States first, which I thought was kind of an interesting answer.
Yeah, and why do you think that is? I mean, first of all, I'm super curious about how well they got along all sitting in the studio together.
That was the appeal for me. I mean, we did it via Zoom, but they do get along reasonably well. One of them, she's a former cabinet minister in Alberta, Shannon Phillips.
Okay.
People can check out that episode if they like. It's just the one right before this. Former environment. She's the one that rolled out Alberta's climate leadership plan. So she introduced, as that minister, the carbon tax in Alberta, which, I mean, you can have a number of different angles on the carbon tax. A lot of people say you got to have it if you want international investment. You got to take action on climate, this, that, and the other. And then there's also, people that can really torque the public politically that have made great hay fighting the carbon tax. Alberta's former Premier Jason Kenney called the 2019 election the referendum on the carbon tax. Pierre Poilievre, who wants to be prime minister, leader of the Conservatives, his Axe the Tax campaign, right? So the carbon tax is an incredibly, do I say divisive? I guess.
Yeah. Third rail, maybe.
Third rail. I mean, the sales tax would be the third rail in Alberta, probably.
Okay.
But this is like, of all the taxes.
Yeah.
We talk about people are concerned about when they get like an inheritance tax or capital gains tax, all these. But the carbon tax just sort of like gets people going more than any other, more than income tax, I think.
Interesting.
To be honest with you.
Well, so symbolic, right? So people estimate it's going to have real implications. But part of it, I think, is it's so symbolic probably for people, like where you stand with respect to climate change, with respect to the energy industry here in Alberta, probably, right? And so carbon tax, people even hear that phrase, right? And so much more comes to mind than just taxation. It's
100%.
Sort of, I'm on this side or that side.
Yeah, and like in an age of inflation and everything else, I mean, a lot of people's costs, in their households and their businesses have gone out of control. And the carbon tax is an easy one to point a finger at. We got an email from a business owner, a great friend of this show, who owns a pizza joint in a city just south of here called Leduc.
Okay.
And he sent us his utilities bills, and he was like, look at my carbon tax. Like, it's no joke, right? Because they run these big pizza ovens, right, the whole day.
Yeah.
And that was just, I've got a cousin that, showed me the bill from when he was drying grain after last harvest. And carbon taxes, like when you circle it on the page, it is a big number. And when people are talking about costs going up, then that's an easy one for politicians to point at and say, maybe that's the culprit, or maybe that's where we should start.
Yeah.
So to wrap up my thoughts, former Minister Phillips is on the show yesterday. She's the carbon tax one. And then we've got, BC's former Conservative Premier Christy Clark, her former Chief of Staff Ken Bosencool here.
Okay.
And I was curious about the dynamic between those two. And Shannon says, she says, he's my biggest supporter that has guaranteed never voted for me. And I thought, well, that's kind of a nice compliment for a friendship, a biggest supporter that's guaranteed never voted for you. So there you go. People can get along outside politics.
I'm really glad to hear it.
I look for the proof of it, because it seems like in the last 10 years, I won't pin it all on Donald Trump, but he can probably own some of the blame on it. Politics has become such a team sport. You don't think that people can be pals anymore unless they vote the same.
Yeah. I mean, yes. What can one say? Yes, I think his behavior has a lot to do with the kind of environment we have in U.S. politics right now, and the willingness of people to be really brash, to put it mildly, right, with one another. And part of it's social media, right? I think it's the storm of Donald Trump using social media, and the way social media can it's just a hotbed of people provoking one another, right? A lot of the apps that we use, a lot of the platforms that we use are designed that way to keep us engaged by not us all holding hands, but but by saying something really provocative and kind of catching each other's attention.
Yeah, no kidding. And like, I mean, I don't know if I say credit where it's due or not, if that's how I want to frame it, but you can't deny that Trump has figured out a way to make it work.
He's really good at it.
He's really good at it. And, he might win this election. There's a very good chance of that. We'll pick your brain on that. It's just wild to me. It's like Taylor Swift, after the debate, endorses Kamala Harris, and that Donald Trump tweets and posts on Truth Social that he hates Taylor Swift. And I'm just thinking, like, the sort of world wrestling entertainment element of American politics.
That's a great way to
just
put
wild. Did you see this confrontation? We'll put it up on the screen so you can see it here. Did you see this? This is the federal NDP leader, Jagmeet Singh, just the other day. He gets called a corrupted bastard by hecklers outside of Parliament Hill. And he just had enough. He did a heel spin. He went back, got right in the guy's face, wanted to know who said it. started calling them cowards. I mean, like we don't typically see stuff like this. This was a pretty remarkable interaction. This was within the last 48 hours of our conversation here. You don't see that a lot. So pretty crazy, but it's kind of, I don't know, if you look at the States, it's like, I don't know, that's where the world's most powerful country is with its politics, and I guess other countries follow suit. Yeah.
And, we feel it within the public too, right? Like we've done work at Wisconsin, and this is going back years. So we've had pretty divided politics in Wisconsin for some time now. I mean, our presidential elections have been on a razor-thin margin since 2000. But we did some polling in 2012 that showed 1 in 3 people living in Wisconsin had actually stopped talking to someone in their life, a close someone, like a family member, a friend, because of politics. So, it's toxic among politicians, and people feel it in the public too.
You're sort of seen as, I don't know, if I say the foremost expert, it probably fits, one of the foremost experts in the United States and probably around the world for your understanding of the dynamic between rural and urban voters. And I'm pretty sure that's a big reason. Well, you are. I mean, your CV speaks for itself, and I'm pretty sure that's why the Faculty of Political Science and Common Ground at the University of Alberta have brought you up here to deliver this pair of lectures and to participate. Obviously, I'm sure you've done a bit of reading on the dynamic in Alberta. You're probably aware that that's a real story here.
Yeah. So it's really eye-opening to me to see how much I started studying this rural-urban divide in Wisconsin, and honestly, I didn't even set out to look at how people in rural places were thinking differently about politics. I was studying something totally different, but I was inviting myself into conversations among people in gas stations and diners around the state, and about a year after doing that, what I was hearing in the rural places was really surprising to me, because I always thought I was a small town girl. I grew up in Wisconsin, but my town was just on the edge of the Milwaukee suburbs. And so it's not small town. It's like, suburban. And I was hearing, I think, what a lot of people here in Alberta experience, which is people in the rural spaces saying things like, we just don't get what we deserve. We don't get our fair share, and we don't get a fair share of not only money and stuff, like resources, but respect, right? Because the folks in the cities, whether we're talking Edmonton or Calgary, they don't know us. They don't know what it's like to live out here or the challenges that we're facing, and they don't actually even like us. So it's, it's surprising, it's eye-opening to hear that similar kinds of things are going on here. But what I heard in Wisconsin, and then wrote about in this book that came out in early 2016, ended up being, the 2016 presidential election in which Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton was a wake-up call for so many people, including me, to understand these rural-urban dynamics are showing up in lots of places around the U.S. and now in many Western democracies.
So your book, The Politics of Resentment, Rural Consciousness in Wisconsin and the Rise of Scott Walker, published in 2016, but you were writing this, you were researching,
For the shout out.
We're really good at throwing in shameless plugs. Good. Yeah. We'll link to your book in the show notes, by the way, on YouTube and wherever people get the podcast. But you were researching and writing this long before Donald Trump was elected.
Yeah.
Like this book is not a response to the Trump victory.
And honestly, his name doesn't even show up in the book.
Huh.
But it was when the book came out, there were some national reporters in the U.S. who reached out to me who were trying to understand what was going on in the 2016 presidential election and said, okay, can you explain to us what you heard in Wisconsin, and do you think it's relevant to other parts of the country? And they helped me kind of connect the dots and realize that what was coming in the presidential election in 2016 reflected the dynamics that I'd been observing in Wisconsin. And just a side story, in the run-up to the 2016 election, Amanda Bittner at Memorial University invited me to a conference about this time in the presidential cycle in 2016 in Newfoundland. And folks there in the public, I gave a public talk one of the nights of the conference, and folks there were asking me, is Donald Trump going to win in 2016? And I had to say, maybe. And so... yes, I was joking with Jared last night that
talking about Dr. Jared Wesley.
Yes, thanks for the shout out.
No, the audience knows him well, so yeah.
I kind of have to say the same thing this time around.
You think he's going to win again?
I don't know, is the honest truth. It's so close. It's just too close to call.
It feels it's closer than 2016, isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean,
I
polling
think
and
so.
otherwise, it feels really close. But you know what? I mean, for supporters of for Democrats, it's way closer than, I mean, they were getting set to be blown out.
Oh yes, it feels completely different. It has felt different almost overnight as soon as Kamala Harris became the candidate.
Yeah.
Just very different. The completely different level of enthusiasm among Democrats. I mean, it feels that way, and we definitely see that in polling, and especially among younger people who are tuned into this election in a way that they definitely were not when Biden was the Democratic candidate.
You think she's drawing in the young vote? Do you see Trump's base the same now as it was 8 years ago?
Pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One amazing thing about his base is just how stalwart and sticky they've been sticking by him, right? Not much change, regardless of events, regardless of his behavior. People have really stuck by him.
It's interesting, like Alberta's premier right now, Danielle Smith, so she's set for, it's just a couple of days before the American election, a leadership review at her party's AGM in Red Deer, just about halfway between here and Calgary. And the leadership review is how most conservative premiers in Alberta meet their demise. They don't lose general elections. Their party gets sick and tired of them. The party turns on them. And it'll be interesting to see what happens here. A lot of people are watching because her base she's got a lot of support in rural areas.
Okay.
She's got a lot of support with, sort of like social conservatives, the religious right, so to speak, et cetera, et cetera. And some business communities and everything else, everything you have to have.
Yeah.
But she famously, before the last election, went on the record. I thought it was a remarkable quote. And she basically said, I don't necessarily need to win the cities to win. And she was right. She won just enough in the cities to win.
Yeah.
But it kind of reiterated that dynamic between rural and urban politics, right?
Yeah, probably, definitely. Not only was she stating a fact that she perceived, but it was probably very symbolic signaling, right? By saying that out loud, you're talking about who you're standing with.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So when we talk, and it resonates with anybody, I know it will with this audience, and you talk about your research and folks in rural areas, whether it's Wisconsin, Alberta, Saskatchewan, or otherwise.
Yeah.
They say, we don't feel respected, we don't feel understood, we don't feel like we're getting what's due to us. I was just scribbling as you were talking. I can think of a couple examples where I hear that constantly. Number one, on crime, and number two, on access to health care. And I'm sure there are many more, right? I'm sure infrastructure spending, secondary highways, bridges, schools, all that kind of stuff too. Obviously, Premier just announced about $8.5 billion for schools.
Okay.
So that's a story this week in Alberta people are talking about. But crime and healthcare, does that hold true in the States as well, in the rural areas?
Absolutely. I mean, healthcare is so huge for rural areas because we have had so many rural hospital closings, especially after COVID. It's just so difficult to keep a hospital open in a place where the economies of scale. I mean, it's just financially it's next to impossible, and people really just resent that they just basic needs. They have to drive a long way to get it. It's often very expensive. Healthcare is just a huge issue in which people see a real disparity in quality of care and access to care between rural areas and urban areas. So yeah, and crime too. Crime is an issue in a lot of rural areas because of the opioid epidemic. But still, people often perceive that a lot of resources are going to cities to deal with crime, and it's an urban issue. And so why do we have to pay higher taxes? Why do we have to pay for those problems that those people are causing and doing to each other? It's probably a similar kind of thing here.
So how does the politics of resentment work? If you're, this isn't your job, but let's say you're advising a premier or a governor on this, is there a political leader with the right approach and the proper policy and the proper insight, their finger on the pulse, we'd say, that can adequately serve urban and rural populations at the same time?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm going to start by saying what they do matters a ton for this dynamic, right? Because the politics of resentment is both, there's these sentiments among people in the public that have been building for decades, partly both because of the way economies have changed. And so since the 70s, in Canada, I think, as in the U.S., the the nature of what's available and economic development in rural places is so different than urban places, and our population just growth has changed where it's stagnated in lots of rural areas or declined, and in urban areas it's grown. But then also who's living in those places in terms of levels of education and racial composition have changed dramatically since the 70s. And so you have these sentiments that it's not just the composition of who's living where, but then the sentiments that grow from the kind of experience you have in those places in the public, right? So people in the rural areas are perceiving, look at all the wealth, all the jobs are in the cities. What about us? We want to thrive too, right? Why isn't anyone paying attention to our concerns? So you have all that in the public, but then you have what our political leaders do, right? So the politics of resentment is very much both things, where it's politicians figuring out, I'm going to tap into that. Or the concerns that I want to stand on, the policies that I want to advocate are really supported or have the potential to be supported by people in one kind of place or another, right? And so then they tap in to the rural versus urban divide. So I'm answering your question in a long way to say what they do is so important, because for most people, I mean, not your listeners, of course, but most people don't care about politics, right? Let's just be honest. But the way political leaders connect the dots for people matters so much for how people feel about issues, what side they think they should stand on, right? When a political leader that they lean toward, they have some affinity for, says, people like us, this is how we feel about this issue, it has so much power for then the stances that people adopt or who they vote for, right? So, all right, so if you're a politician who wants to overcome this divide, and honestly, in the U.S. right now, it's not, oftentimes the advantage is to not bridge the divide, but instead to tap in to your base, which tends to be in one kind of place or another, right? Democrat stronghold in our urban areas, Republican stronghold in our rural areas, increasingly since the early 90s. So if you're an unusual politician who wants to tap into that, I really think what you need to focus on is the economy, and just the way in which the economy currently is structured in a way that doesn't help a lot of people across the board, regardless of area. And there's certain kinds of policies, things that we hear in rural and urban areas: childcare, jobs, job training or retraining, right? Housing is huge. Like, the cost of living is off the charts like housing affordability in both our rural and urban areas in the United States. You hear a lot about lack of affordable housing in urban areas, but it's an issue in rural areas too, and sometimes just like availability of housing in some places that have had a boom with respect to, like, for example, the oil industry in the U.S. People, there's some stories about folks we heard on this, the work I am doing this with this commission, folks in Montana actually enrolling in graduate school so they could obtain housing through the university.
So they could get student housing.
Yes, because it was that scarce.
That reminds me of old school, one of Vince Vaughn's best work, but I digress. We don't have to.
Yeah, but so that was
maybe one of the greatest
response.
comedies of all time, as a matter of fact, Old School. People can debate that among themselves. Yeah, that's wild. Hey, it's we see, across the country, there's a housing crunch. Probably around the world. I got to be careful saying that. There's 8 billion people, but in Canada,
lots of places,
certainly across the country. And then maybe exacerbated by different things in different jurisdictions, right? Like British Columbia, obviously, Vancouver on the West Coast, it's more like a lot of international buyers, and like their real estate's out of control. So is Toronto's. In Alberta, it's like a kind of a good problem to have. And Premier talked about this, Danielle Smith, a couple of nights ago. She did a televised address, and they were talking about the crunch, and Alberta's looking, she says she believes that Alberta can double its population. A lot of people forecast that could happen in the next 40 years from like 5 to 10 million people.
No kidding.
They've been really soliciting it. Like Alberta's got low taxes, generally speaking, compared to the rest of the country. We have this Alberta is Calling campaign, right, where the government buys a bunch of billboards in Ontario and everywhere else where people can't afford to live.
Yeah.
And, offer incentives, like $5,000 incentives to move to Alberta.
Oh, wow, yeah.
But then they get here, and then we collectively as a province are like, sorry, we don't have resources for you. Sorry, there's no housing. Sorry that the hospitals are crunched. Sorry that like schools, your kids can have to bus out of jurisdiction to a different. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's like these big recruitment campaigns to get everybody here, but it's like realistically, the province isn't ready for it, right? Bursting at the seams, so to speak.
Fascinating. Yeah. Well.
So what do you do, right? Like it's not smart strategically as a political leader to sort of try to slow the flow of people that are eager to come to your country. Depending, I was going to your country. That was a Freudian slip because she is talking about immigration. She doesn't want the premier's, sort of drawing a line with the federal government. This is an Alberta thing, right? Yeah. Alberta premier's fighting with the feds.
Okay. Yep.
That's a long-standing tradition. If you don't fight hard enough or look like you're fighting hard enough, sayonara.
Okay.
And so they don't want as many asylum seekers in Alberta, so says the premier, but they want Canadians coming in, skilled tradespeople and the like. And, it's tough optics, I think, if you're trying to recruit, but you can't manage the influx. Yeah. What did you expect? People ask.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You've been doing a ton of work on and I love how I don't want to steal the words out of your mouth.
You can.
What's good for people versus what's good for the economy. Yeah. In other words, people do not equal the economy. Yeah. Can we go into this in a second?
Yeah.
I'll pay a couple bills, speaking of the economy.
Sure. Okay, good luck.
How about that?
Great.
Yeah, and then we'll be back with Dr. Kathy Cramer, loving this, and we'll jump into the Real Talk live chat as well because people are enjoying this. So there's a whole bunch of people that are watching us live right now.
Love to hear what people are saying.
So we'll get to their take on that. First, I wanted to remind you, if you're not yet following our friends at Kubi Renewable Energy on Instagram, give them a follow today. At Kubi Energy. I mean, number one, I just love their content. They have an amazing team there led by Tegan, and Tegan's always got the drone out, and they're shooting these like beautiful videos of their installations. Of course, residential, commercial, industrial, agricultural, you name it. Cleanest installs in the biz, but the reason specifically why I'm talking about their Instagram today is because they've just posted they are hiring. That's right, they're looking for journey person electricians. If you're looking to bring your expertise to the renewable energy field, they've got opportunities in Edmonton, Calgary, and Kamloops, BC. Get your career started into that next level. Help with Canada's green energy revolution by visiting the careers link at kubienergy.ca. Let's talk about housing. Gosh, I can't help but think about our friends in Jasper, Alberta. They're getting set to welcome visitors back, but before they do that, they got to welcome the residents, and for a lot of people, there's a lot of work to do before their lives are going to get back to normal. The team at Complete Care Restoration has deployed many of their expert, trained technicians, whether it's demolition, reconstruction, sometimes it might be fixing smoke damage or otherwise. They've done it all for more than 25 years, restoring properties and rebuilding peace of mind. Heaven forbid, if disaster strikes in your neck of the woods, remember the name Complete Care Restoration. We're talking politics with a guest of the University of Alberta Faculty of Political Science and Common Ground. Dr. Jared Wesley's been on the show before talking about that. I love the premise of what they do. As a matter of fact, we'll link to one of our past interviews with Dr. Wesley in the show notes so you can check it out. But Dr. Cramer, if you're just tuning in on the Mixler live streaming audio app presented by California Closets, a professor of political science at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Americans, or people, let's say, do not equal the economy. In other words, what's good for the economy is not always good for people. You've been doing a lot of research on this.
Yeah, so I was asked to co-chair this commission for the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and the premise of the commission was, we need to think about what we need to do differently to help Americans thrive, as opposed to focusing on what makes the economy well, right? Because when we talk about the economy is doing well, the economy is not doing well, what we're talking about is typically the GDP, stock market, and those are things that are actually not all that meaningful to lots of people in the United States. So not everybody has a vested interest in the stock market. And so we focused on, what are the challenges that people are feeling, just typical Americans, And what do we need to do? What kind of policies and practices need to be put into place to help people just have what they need to be able to have time with their families, to be able to have some leisure time, to not have to worry so much, right? The level of insecurity is so pervasive in the United States and really inhibits both individuals from thriving and the whole economy. Because if you're worried about, is my job going to be here next year? You can't plan, right? You can't plan for a vacation, but you also can't think about, okay, I've always wanted to start this business. It really inhibits entrepreneurship and small business ownership because people feel so precarious, right? So, yeah, we've been listening to what challenges people are facing and trying to create. We have this online dashboard we created people can check out. It's called the Core Score, coursescore.us. And it's some set of measures about how well Americans are doing, both economically with respect to economic security and opportunity, but also politically and in terms of just physical health.
Coursescore.us, we're showing it right now. There you go, measuring well-being. We don't do that enough, do we? I wish I could remember which friend, someone I follow on Instagram. I saw this on their story yesterday. I'd show you if I could remember who it was, but it was like a 3-part graphic, and there's a candle burning, and at the top, and it says, "This is what I'm supposed to do," and then there's a candle burning at both ends, and it says, "This is what my therapist warned me about," and then the third one says, "This is me right now," and just the whole candle is on fire all the way across, and I just feel like that sort of speaks for the average person right now. I like the very first thing you said is time with our families, because so many people right now, it's like they're hoping that they can make time for their second or third job.
Isn't that the truth?
Not downtime.
Right. Yeah. And the idea, the fact that the idea of having enough time to spend with your families, however you define that, is an issue. It's just really sad. So what's the point of the economy, right? Like, ideally, I don't mean to get too social sciencey here, but ideally, an economy is a way we organize so that we can make sure we share resources, that we all get what we need in order to live, if not thrive, right? But that's not what it is anymore, right? It's focused, it's focused on making lots of money. It's focused on profit as opposed to just general well-being. And I know some listeners will hear that and say, "God, she sounds like a socialist." I don't mean it that way, right? Like I do believe in capitalism. You don't have to do
much to be smeared as a socialist in Alberta. Just FYI.
Yeah. Well, okay.
Maybe full-blown communist if you're not. If you start talking about sharing or helping your neighbors.
To the extent that it matters, I don't think of myself that way. I do think capitalism is a way for economies to grow and for nations to really thrive. And but we've kind of gotten off the rails in terms of what it actually does for people.
Keith is in our chat right now. He says, "I can very much appreciate this conversation. It is truthful." He says, and noting that the political machine is setting up this kind of extension of this divide between rural and urban areas. He says, "We'll see it on display next week at Alberta Municipalities in Red Deer." This is like a big agency and organization, represents like a couple hundred, maybe a few hundred different Alberta municipalities, obviously with different perspectives, right? Like, big cities all the way down to the villages, right?
Oh,
so,
fascinating.
So, and there are like many different issues, obviously, and then there are some common threads too.
Yeah.
Like you can live in the downtown core somewhere, or you can live on 300 acres.
Yep.
And still be concerned about the safety of your family, as an example.
I think so.
Right? Or still be concerned about the fact you can't find a family doctor, right?
Yeah.
Or that it's going to take 18 months to have a hip surgery. Like that's the kind of stuff that doesn't really matter where you live.
Yeah.
Different contributing factors, obviously.
Yeah.
Can we, before we run out of time?
Yeah.
And I know your day is jam packed today.
Oh, are we running out of time already? I'm just enjoying this so much.
Time flies when you're talking politics on Real Talk, right?
Yes.
But I know that you're working on a book now, and my understanding is that you rewind the clock like basically almost 75 years.
Yeah.
And you take a look at sort of how we get to present day politically, economically, and otherwise. Is that
Yeah,
the general theme?
Yes. So I've been working on this book with a political scientist by the name of Larry Bartels, who is at Vanderbilt University. And what we did was to take advantage of this awesome panel study that has been done of people who were high school seniors in 1965. So they were interviewed for the first time when they were 18 in 65, and then followed up through the course of their life up through 1997. And we used that panel data, survey data, and then we went back and did a bunch of in-depth interviews with them to ask, how did Americans respond to the massive social and economic changes in that country since 1965? And we basically learned that the seeds of our current divides go way back, at least 1965, because the way people thought about the Bible in 1965, whether or not they believed that everything it said was God's word and everything it said was true, or if their interpretation was more along the lines of, I don't know, if this is God's word, but these are great, useful stories. Those interpretations had so much to do with how people responded to the massive social change. So people who believed that the Bible is God's word were much less likely to be open to social change, like women's rights, civil rights movement, much more likely to be hawkish on the Vietnam War. So that's one way in which we saw that, the divides we see now between the Republican Party, which tends to be the home to more traditionally, more morally traditional people. Yeah. And the Democratic Party, which is more, some might say, cosmopolitan or sort of more open to otherness, right? Those divides
That was a very generous
back.
description of both, by the way.
Well, thanks.
I think that was a generous description of both.
Well, thank you. I try. Right?
Yeah, we do too.
Yeah.
We do too. Like, I don't think that every conservative is a Nazi, and I don't think every liberal is a communist.
Amen.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
I like to believe that there's some common ground. I like to believe that that the Venn diagram is actually pretty.
Absolutely. Right. And when you talk
to
when you talk to everyday people, right? Generally that's the vibe I get, where people definitely have strong points of view, and they're more than ever, or at least in my lifetime, see which side they're supposed to be on. Still, people at root believe in the decency of people, right? Believe that most people are just trying to do their best. They're trying to get along and do their best. You don't necessarily get that vibe through social media, but when you have face-to-face time with people and people just talk as human beings, it comes across.
100%. Yeah, social media, it depends on the platform too.
Yes, and I'm sorry to knock social media so much.
No, it's fine. You can do whatever you want. But it's funny, we have, I don't know, Johnny, jump in. It's interesting the dynamic here, even on our accounts, right? On the Real Talk accounts. Yeah. You'll put out, Johnny does these great highlights and reels and things like that. We'll sort of like today we'll do one with you. We'll take your best 60 seconds and we'll put it out there. And but Johnny, sometimes something that we'll put out there that'll be has explosive potential. Mm-hmm. It'll go wild on YouTube. Mm-hmm. It'll get people talking on Twitter. Instagram, it'll do okay. Mm-hmm. And then TikTok will ban it.
Yeah, I feel like each social media has its own personality.
Yeah,
I feel like Instagram is like the neighbor, like Ned Flanders. Hey, yeah. I just want to show you puppies and flowers and my newborn baby.
What I'm eating.
And then the contrast when you go on X is just it's like heavy metal playing in the background and warheads on foreheads. It's ridiculous, right? And then YouTube is kind of in the middle, the conspiracy theorist guy, like trying to get you to question everything, even if your algorithm isn't set to it, you're still getting sent these videos that are question everything,
yeah.
right? So each one has its own thing, but I do miss the days where all of that was like remember when there was just Facebook and it was like, I'm going to find a friend and I'm going to talk to that friend.
Yeah.
We're so far removed from that now. They're literally, they're tools, right? That like, especially X when you've got Elon,
but
literally a guy with an opinion who owns basically a news outlet.
Well, and he's
telling people how to think.
He's
right?
doing everything he can. Bang on, by the way. He's doing everything he can to influence the outcome of this presidential election, like Elon, which is I mean, on one hand, he's entitled to do it, right?
Yes.
I mean, Jeff Bezos, if he owns the Wall Street Journal, or is that the one he owns? Washington Post. Which one? Anyway, the Post.
Yep.
It's just weird because like me personally, if I had that much money, you'd never see me again. I would never want to interfere in people's lives,
if
right?
I had won 100th
you know what I mean?
I'd be
maybe
gone.
I would invest in something that makes money, but you would never see me meddling in people's lives, and that's what. You know, I understand why people call Elon Musk a genius, but at the same time, I'm like, something's off with that guy, because to have that much money and to want that much control over people's lives it's just strange to me. I'd be on an island. I'd be gone.
Yeah. Can I redeem myself briefly? I'll be super brief.
Well, you don't need. No, I do not accept the premise of that. You don't need to redeem yourself.
Well, with respect to technology, so I'm knocking social media, but one thing I should mention is that I have had the honor of working with this awesome lab of computer scientists at MIT since shortly after the 2016 presidential election, when this amazing person named Deb Roy introduced himself to me at a conference. And he runs this lab called the Lab for Constructive Communication, Center for Constructive Communication at the MIT Media Lab. And there's an affiliated nonprofit with that lab called Cortico. And together, we've created this platform that is basically the merging of humans and technology to use technology to enable people to both listen to one another, to lift up the voices of people who aren't normally heard, to share those voices with policymakers. And it has convinced me, I'm someone who's super skeptical of technology, but it has convinced me that technology itself is not bad, right? It's how we use it. And there are ways in which we can use it to actually bring people together in ways that are constructive, not to use the name of the center, but you know, it is possible to do this differently.
People can check out CCC, that's ccc.mit.edu. This is like talking to folks like you, experts like you. It comes out 40 minutes into the interview that you're also working at MIT. Jeez.
Well,
I should have had that. I should have had that in the intro.
People.
How cool is that, though?
It's so cool. They're just brilliant people who are putting these amazing skills to use seriously for the public good. They're just inspiring. Yeah.
I like to be able to have some faith that we're all going to be okay down the line. You know, I don't know if you've seen the new Netflix series. It's just out. Bill Gates talking about this, and they're talking about, okay, so this stuff kind of, I'm not a tinfoil hat guy at all. I'm a realist. I have one foot, planted in dreamland and 1 foot planted on solid ground.
Yeah, I like that.
But the whole thing, we've done a lot of shows on like AI and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And Bill Gates is talking about how AI will be able to improve on AI, which will create a better AI and a better AI and a better AI. And then all of a sudden you're going, okay, so basically we're going to be taken over and we're all screwed. We screwed ourselves. But he says, imagine what that could do for like cancer and AIDS and world hunger and the economy.
Okay.
And you know what I mean?
Yep.
So then I kind of did what you just did. I kind of took a bit of a breath and I went, that sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
Like if a better AI created by AI could create better cancer care, I'm down for that.
Yeah, me too. Sign me up. Yep.
I should put a rural audience member on the record here. So we got this
Please.
one. I appreciated this one from Peaches, who says, us rural hicks are quite tired of being told how to talk, think, and act by the sanctimonious city dwellers. We're independent and city people are not. So that from Peaches. Wanted to make sure I got a rural voice on the record.
Yeah,
You know what I appreciate? I tell this audience this all the time. I have a bit of a crush on our audience.
That's so awesome. I'm sure they feel it.
Well, we have people that live in downtown condos, and we have people that are running ranches, and we have right wingers, and we have left wingers, and we have people that don't even vote. And I think that sets this talk show apart from a lot of talk shows.
Way to go.
But that also means that we can rile up the audience a little bit every once in a while when there's a voice they don't like. But I think people also appreciate peeks into other perspectives, understanding what makes other people tick, right?
They definitely do, yeah. And that's part of like the inspiration of this thing we've created with Cortico and CCC, that people, are having a hard time talking with one another across dividing lines right now, but they're also really interested.
Yeah.
Really wondering what is going on for those people. Why are they thinking what they're thinking? Sometimes they say it not so charitably, right? But when people genuinely want to know, it's great that you can offer the opportunity to try to get a sense of how are other people understanding the world. Because once we get that, then we actually can see each other and treat each other as human beings.
I like the way you roll, Doc.
I
Thanks
like
for
the
doing
way you
this.
roll. This has been a sheer delight.
The feeling is mutual. I'm just taking a look at the University of Alberta Faculty of Arts and Political Science homepage here, and I do note that you are appearing on a panel in 41 minutes.
Am I?
Now the good news is
Okay.
you're only about 13 minutes away from the university, so you're good. They'll get you in there. They'll get you settled with a coffee.
I am in such good hands with this visit. I just do what they tell me.
Yeah, they're going to take you on the way to the university. I think they're going to take you over the historic high-level bridge.
I've heard.
Yeah, so this bridge is as old as the province.
Cool.
And it originally connected the two cities of Strathcona and Edmonton.
I see.
So all this talk about bridging the gap, you'll see it
so
in action
symbolic.
on one of our iconic structures.
I'm going to feel the
next
heavens
10
open
minutes.
up as we cross the bridge.
That's right.
That's
if you're lucky enough,
awesome.
you'll see the vintage streetcar going right above you.
Cool.
Yeah, I feel like I'm working for the tourism board right now.
You're doing a great job.
Thanks for doing this.
Thank you,
Yeah.
seriously, for having me on.
That's Dr. Kathy Cramer. We're going to put links to her book and some of the projects she's been working on in the show notes. And I want to say thank you personally to Dr. Jared Wesley, who's hanging out. It feels weird to have you in studio,
Yeah,
Doc, and not
it's
bring you
okay.
on the show. But we'll bring you back soon and check out the show notes for our most recent conversation with Dr. Wesley as well. This conversation here has been made possible. We were talking about family businesses, and we're talking about the economy. We're also talking about urban and rural areas. Friesen Brothers is serving Albertans across the province, and they have done so for a long, long time. And I want to put the Alberta Beef Roundup on your radar. It's coming up this weekend. They got their big feast. You can find out the details. This is at the Friesen Brothers Kitchens, these locations where you can basically walk in and enjoy a meal just like Grandma used to make. I mean, I'm talking the classic recipes, all for a low, low price. But they've also got an opportunity for your family to fill your freezer with the Alberta Beef Roundup. It's like 70 pounds, a custom cut whole hip, featuring the finest Alberta beef. The skilled butchers there at Friesen Brothers are going to hook you up exactly how you like it. Made to order. They'll wrap it up. You fill your freezer. More information at friesen.com/Alberta Beef Roundup. And we talked to you a lot about, obviously, the Mixlr live streaming audio app. It's a great way for you to catch Real Talk on the go. If your car has it, you can download it right to your dashboard. Otherwise, you can find it on your phone, run it through Bluetooth. That's presented every single episode by our friends at California Closets. I personally, every single day, open up a California closet. My wife, Carrie, and I invested in this like 10 years ago, and we still love it. It still looks incredible. And it helps us stay organized like we just couldn't before. We worked with their design team on a custom system that worked for our home. And that first consultation, by the way, totally free, risk-free. You sit down, you talk to them, you lay out the budget. They can hit you from a number of different angles, from the modest installation, nice and clean and simple, all the way up to the extravagant stuff. They've done it all, and they're the best in the business. Comes with a lifetime guarantee. You can check out the client stories, the testimonials online at californiaclosets.ca. I love that conversation. Just that's like just like an informed, measured, optimistic, realistic take on politics and people. We talk a lot about politics, but sometimes I think we lose our focus. Sometimes I think, to be honest with you, politicians lose their focus on the people.
Well, come
the
on.
everyday people.
The good doctor from Wisconsin. They're the salt of the earth down there.
I agree. And
Beautiful, friendly, neighborly Wisconsians.
I didn't want to say this
Is that how you say
to
it?
her.
Probably not.
Wisconsins, maybe? I should have asked her. Wisconsians? No,
Cheeseheads
Wisconsin. It's got to be
or something? I
Wisconsin.
don't know.
Wisconsinites. But like, I love the accent too. The Wisconsin accent.
So slight.
Yeah, I went to school.
You almost don't notice it.
My friend Liz, who from Wisconsin, we'd always just be like, when she'd talk, I'd be like, talk some more. Talk
you know
some more.
You know what's funny? When I was younger, I had like a little American accent because I was from I lived in the South. My family's from the South. Now it's gone. When the Spittin' Chicklets guys were here, they said, both you and me, they said, yeah, it's really, it's really noticeable, you guys with the Canadian accents. We're like, we looked at each other. Yeah. I remember thinking like, we have Canadian accents? They're like, oh my God. When we walked in, we were like, and I was like, what is specific about it? He's like, you just hear it. And I was like, oh, wow. But something like our ears don't really hear. But they immediately said you and I had Canadian accents.
Interesting. I wonder if it was like certain words that I remember, talking to broadcasters back in the day. I think of like Leslie Miller, Chris Galis, Pat Kiernan, broadcasters that went down and did well. Canadian broadcasters went down and did well in the U.S. And they would often say that, once you got down there into the American news ecosystem, you could do really well because Canadian talent didn't have the perception of a regional accent. So you could put a Canadian anchor on in Seattle or in Madison, Wisconsin, or in Boston, and they wouldn't have a regional accent. You take somebody from like Boston and you put them in San Diego. The viewers in San Diego, subliminally or otherwise, may not buy it.
It could also be because we're in Alberta here, and maybe we have that kind of. Hey there, bud. Come on in. We're going to have a Tilly tonight, and don't get into a Donnybrook after a couple too many brews. But yeah, sit down, and maybe I don't know. Maybe that's just like some bro talk we were giving to them or whatever. But I that really stuck in my head when they came in for the first 10 minutes. They're like, oh, the Canadian accent. I'm like, what are we saying here? We're not saying a boot or anything.
That's right. Roof. We got interesting conversation going on in the live chat on the difference between rural and urban populations, and I sure appreciate
they're always
that
pitted
feedback.
Against each other.
Well, and it doesn't make sense. Who was it?
Yeah.
Was it Travis or somebody else in there? Basically said, I apologize, I can't give credit, I can't find it, but someone basically said, I've lived urban, I've lived rural. There's a lot of similarities, a lot of commonalities, and it's counterproductive to pit them against each other. It makes zero sense.
It's really weird.
Now I understand, it's okay to have different priorities. Yeah. And if you think about it, I mean, you can't say that like everybody in the city is like a progressive or a lefty, and everybody in the rural areas is a right winger. But generally speaking, you'll find like in more rural communities, there are many more what you might refer to as like traditional values.
Sure,
that is a thing. And in the cities, you get a little less of that. But then you see overlap.
But we know rural people, and they're not like wearing a straw hat and chewing on a piece of hay. Like I have friends who have gotten married and moved to the rural areas because they want a little quieter life, and then they come into the city to work or to play on the weekends, and nothing has changed about them. I also know people who grew up rural now live in the city or have lived in rural their whole life, and this whole, I think the doctor touched on that. It's something for politicians to grab onto and to play as a chess piece when they're defining their policies and things they want people to think about, and making division and getting, reelected or whatever it is, because I don't see all this. I mean, I see it a little, like there are differences, and you can see them in our chat. People have different opinions, but me talking to rural, we're downtown working every day. The people I know who work rural, people I know who live in I know one girl, I did her wedding. She lives in Vegreville. We talk about the same stuff, the same music, the same culture, the same, movies. It just makes no sense to me.
Shout out to Vegreville.
Yeah. But it just makes no sense to me that there's always this rural versus like we're enemies.
Well, it's because we're buying into it. We're buying into what politicians are trying to convince us about, right? Travis says, he says that wasn't me. He says it's just laughably silly, the notion that we're all so different. Keith back in the chat. It's great to see Keith. He says I've lived in downtown Calgary. He says now I'm a small town counselor, 3,700 people. Where Keith's living. So that's hilarious. Hey, by the way, did you see this? Did you happen to see this video? Let me just show you this for the benefit of the folks on the podcast.
Oh my! I saw it this morning.
We are watching something that I think many people, including the man himself, never thought would ever happen up until a short time ago. But on the 17th of September, just a couple of days ago, our good friend Charles Adler, swore in to the Senate of Canada. There he is. Our live studio audience absolutely loves this. Look at that. And look look
right next to her.
Look who's flanking him there. Hey, another good friend of ours, independent senator out of Alberta, Paula Simons, is there with Chuck as he swears in. But this is, I'll be honest with you, surreal to see.
Very, very happy to see him.
And not just because he's wearing a tie.
I was going to say, not in a Real Talk hat with a gallon of chocolate milk.
I was kind of hoping.
Cleaned up.
I was kind of hoping he'd wear his Real Talk snapback to swear into the Senate. You can buy yours, by the way, under the merch link at ryanjespersen.com. But there he is. Look at this. So the big fella is all official, and just our sincere congratulations to Charles Adler as he begins the next stage of his career, as I've described it, his career of public service. I think that Charles has driven conversation and debate on many important issues. He has lived his life out loud, which is not, it's a choice you make when you choose a career as a talk show host. But if you're not willing to put yourself out there, you're going to have a lousy talk show without an audience. And obviously, most people, I think, are familiar with Charles's story as both a small and big C conservative for many, many years, as the star, the host of the flagship programs on some of the most conservative media outlets in the country, including the Sun News Network, obviously a long run on the Chorus Radio Network as well. And then in later years, kind of, I don't know if I want to say softened, but certainly moved more toward the middle. Look at him all shaking everybody's hand.
I'm waiting to see where his seat is. Oh, he's got third row back.
They've got him in the back.
Third row back.
But that's where you start. I don't think
you got to work your way up to the good seats.
You got to work your way up to the good seats. And I think when you're learning the gig, you don't want to be front row anyway. I was never front row on the first day of school. No. Forget that. But it'll be obviously it's a neat opportunity for Chuck. And everybody's got their opinion, their strong opinions on whether or not the Senate appointment was a good one. Charles spoke with us exclusively after he was appointed to the Senate by the Prime Minister, and you can watch that interview in our archives. I think we've announced this before on the show, but I don't know if we haven't. But we officially sort of looked into, as did Charles, whether or not we'd be able to keep his recurring role on Real Talk. He was presented here every Monday, and the Ethics Commissioner has actually weighed in, and so he cannot. I don't want to get too into it, but basically can't get paid for what he was doing with us while he's a senator.
Well, people have been asking, so I feel like we should address it.
People are sort of going like, where is Chuck? Is he going to keep coming back on Mondays? So we will.
He's not going to be here.
He'll come back and do interviews in so many ways as we talk to a lot of senators.
Sure.
But he's not obviously going to be here every Monday like he was. But it was a hell of a run. And we had him weekly for a long time. Yeah. And I think the show was richer for having had him,
of course,
in that capacity, and I think he's got a lot to offer the Senate and for Canadians.
And we'll do a little audit of his expenditures after the first year of him being there, and we'll compare to the other senator who was on here.
Yeah, I love that with Paula Simons.
Yeah,
Remember
we'll compare him and Paula's sandwich tally.
That was so funny, that conversation we had with Paula Simons. I'll see if I can track it down while we're talking here, but it wasn't that long ago. And she was coming on.
It just came out.
The Alberta senator
while we were chatting.
Yeah, the Alberta senator was on talking about whatever she was talking about, and all of a sudden she brings up her expenses, or she starts bringing up, here it is, this, we talked to her, it was 2 months ago already. I can't believe that. The 19th of July, we were talking to Senator Simons, and kind of almost as a joke.
We went all through it, though.
We started going through her expense reports because they're all available online.
And my eyes just, because I'm like, wow, you usually don't get that window into like what someone buys for lunch, what they spend on this and that, and she was very open about
But you can tell that she's a former journalist, right? Because like she basically, it's like she's getting ahead of an issue, and so her expenses, like her expense claims are like, I don't want to say non-existent, but like very, what's going on? There's like all hell breaking loose outside.
Hey, we're downtown, man.
Every fire truck in the city's outside our studio right now. But yeah, it was amazing because you could just tell. I just felt like she was like ready to be audited because she doesn't claim anything. You'd have to be careful with stuff like that. Yeah. There's no context when people, especially your political opponents, are digging into things like your expense reports. There's no context. There's no nuance. It's dollars and cents.
You could tell she knew she hadn't bought any, $24 orange juices or anything like that. But the sandwiches were, geez. I was unhappy to hear about what they pay for sandwiches in and around their work places, senators.
Yeah. No, I want to touch on something else here because I just love there's nothing like bringing receipts. Right, and so someone says to us here, is it
send your receipts to talk at Ryan
Vamp
Jespersen.
Fashions. I'm just Vamp Fashion says, well, maybe you should bring in the Alberta senator in waiting, Alberta senator elect, to replace him with a sane voice. And it's just like I just kind of look at this and I think, gosh, like it's almost like we know what we're doing. And it's almost like maybe we thought that would be a good idea as well. And so if you haven't seen it, on September 6th, you can look back and you can see elected senator in waiting, or as she describes herself, the senator in still waiting, Erica Barudis, who appeared on the show with us alongside her podcasting partner, Cheryl Oates, to talk about Charles Adler's Senate appointment and a whole bunch of other stuff, including what Danielle Smith's doing heading up to that leadership review at the beginning of November. That is the September 6th episode with Erica Barudis and Cheryl Oates. I wanted to get to a couple of emails. We always appreciate when you take the time to send us a note, and that's what Calvin did here. Calvin was tuned in and watching Danielle Smith's TV address just a couple of nights ago, and just had a few thoughts that he wanted to share with us. He said, some facts for my fellow Real Talkers here. He says, regarding Alberta's own policies to attract people to the province, we talked about this with Kathy just a few minutes ago. He says Alberta has one of the lowest provincial tax income rates, except when compared to Ontario, which has a lower marginal rate for incomes under about $103,000. It's worth noting that most provinces' lowest bracket is below Alberta's 10% rate, but the Premier's planned personal income tax decrease. Remember this one that Danielle Smith promised when she was running, just a short time ago when she won that election. Obviously, we asked her about it shortly after that. Says it's going to exacerbate. Calvin says this income tax cut is going to exacerbate migration to the province, especially when you compare the cost of housing between the GTA, for example, in Toronto and Alberta. He says, plus you've got this Alberta is calling moving bonus, right? $5,000 to help offset the cost of moving to Alberta for an eligible occupation, which is great, by the way, for businesses, for industries that need to staff up, for people that are looking or considering moving to Alberta. It's great, right? But Calvin says, what did the government expect? Like nobody was going to come? Nobody was going to take advantage of it? He says, and then on top of the school board conversations, Premier promised about $8.5 billion in new schools, which is sort of like the takeaway. If you look at least online, a lot of the talk on how people are analyzing or sort of like chewing on and digesting what Danielle Smith put out there in her TV address. The big one is the school announcements. And Calvin says, school boards are 100% on top of capital and operating spending. It's required by the province. He says, so people can look online and easily find, if you Google it, what's already been approved by the province for expenditures. Edmonton Public Schools, as an example, their own capital planning. Says you can find 2-pagers online with a 3-year capital plan. He says, and I do believe that Edmonton Public in particular will be able to knock off quite a few of their top priorities. So that's a good thing. But Calvin says, my gut check is that the government is basically funding plans that are mostly in place, which is good. But politically, it looks like they're taking credit for everybody else's great work. That from Calvin. So that's his assessment of it. Probably pretty bang on. Probably nothing new in politics, but there you go. He says, and regarding chartered schools, he says, you often ask us, Ryan, to let you know who you'd like to hear on the show. He says, I would love to see a panel of Catholic and public school trustees discussing the cost of all this choice that the province is providing within public education, right? Just in Edmonton alone, the cost of operations and maintenance, not teachers, of the Edmonton Public School Board and the Edmonton Catholic School Board. He says for Edmonton Catholic, it's over $79 million. For Edmonton Public, it's over $182 million. He says, so we're talking about $250 million in Edmonton alone. Like, do we really need to be paying for more education administration in the province? Can we not better leverage what we're already paying for? Calvin says these chartered schools are not subject to the same disclosures as public or Catholic school divisions. It's just built for abuse. That from Calvin, who wrote in to talk@ryanjespersen.com, which we really appreciate. You can send us your thoughts anytime. As we wrap, I want to remind you of a couple of things. We sure appreciate when you tell your friends about what's happening here on Real Talk and when you share our interviews as well. If you happen to watch this episode on YouTube and you liked what you heard from Dr. Cramer, go ahead and give it a like. Maybe share it with your network. And of course, you can always subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. We sure appreciate when you review the show as you've downloaded that podcast. Coming up on Friday's episode, we're really excited to introduce you to the hosts of a podcast project that we're working on. It launches on September 20th. And so, of course, we're going to be encouraging you to download it, to check it out. But first, we want you to get to know the names of the people behind it. It's a federal political show with analysis from coast to coast. I think you're really going to like it. Make sure you catch that episode. Until then.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jespersen, executive producer Josh Dunford, technical producer John Hicks, general manager Katie Cook-Chivers, account coordinator Lawrence Derlego, human resources Lena Shepard, website design Mike Johnston, voiceover by me, Carrie Skelton. Real Talk's editorial board is Supriya Dwivedi, Ahmed Ali, Brandy Morin, Ann Castleman, Corey Hogan, Harmon Candola, Catherine O'Neill, and Chris Henderson. Member Emerita, Julie Rohr. Real Talk is recorded in Edmonton, Alberta on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota Sioux, home to the Métis settlements and the Métis Nation of Alberta. Real Talk is a relay project. For more, check out ryanjespersen.com.